Thank you so much. Great. All right, and I'm going to see this. There we go. See if I can get my slides to work. Okay. All right. Hey, we're rolling. So nice to be with all of you. Really, it's such a pleasure to be here. Larissa, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present here, and I've been enriched by the messages I've heard so far and look forward to the rest of the conference. This image doesn't really pertain directly to Russia, does it? To Russian symbolism, but I wanted to share it with you. My wife Noni and I just came from Munich, and we were able to see this famous painting, Die Musik, by Gustav Klimt in person at the Alte Pinakothek in central Munich. It's a challenging image, strange, melancholic, dense with symbolism, laden with spiritual resonance. The painting wields obvious power, partly in the questions it raises. What does it mean? And how does it work? It's the weight of these impressions rather than the answers to the questions that lies at the heart of that late Romantic development, known, among others, as symbolism. At the heart of the movement lay the notion that art could wield spiritual power in its very materials, without or in addition to the interposition of logic. The objects in Klimt's music, some two-dimensional, some three, some real, some abstract, may seem incongruous, but together they exude a mythological ethos, music's fabled power to transport us to another realm. The movement resonated well beyond Klimt's native Austria, of course. It had begun in France and also greatly animated Russia's Silver Age. Yet despite being in the right place at the right time, Sergei Rachmaninoff may seem foreign to the movement. In his most popular concert works, such as the Second Piano Concerto, melancholy appears as a force to be transcended, not indulged. And his opposition to all forms of modernism is famous. That included symbolism. Though personally acquainted with its major Russian exponents, Rachmaninoff disliked their ideology, avoided their philosophical conversations, rejected efforts to position him as an ally, and refused at least one invitation to collaborate. To this day, he is still widely regarded as a romantic bygone, and his connections with the Silver Age are downplayed or dismissed, even by scholars of the period. Scriabin, by contrast, was viewed from within as Russian symbolism's prime musical exponent, and scholars have largely agreed, dubbing him the movement's supreme protagonist, even its poster child. Be all this as it may, Rachmaninoff's connections with symbolism are there for all to see. He composed a tone poem to Arnold Böcklin's painting Isle of the Dead, a choral symphony to Constantine Balmont's translation of Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Bells, and Russian symbolist poetry in his Opus 38 songs. Other opuses speak in a similar musical language despite lacking outward associations, such as his Opus 39 Etude Tableau, and the work at hand, his opera Francesca da Rimini. In all these works, Rachmaninoff spontaneously employed compositional techniques that have come to be associated with symbolism, displaying an affinity for his time, belied by his anti-modernist persona. In Francesca, he evoked the story's uncanny content with non-functional harmony, a rotational approach to form, and motivic reminiscences that collapse temporal and spatial boundaries. The greatest obstacle to appreciating Rachmaninoff's affinity with symbolism isn't actually unfamiliarity with his oeuvre. It's the pronounced stylistic disunity of symbolist music. We're talking Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, Scriabin's Prometheus, and Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire. Any discussion of musical symbolism must therefore proceed on a foundation of qualifications. No prominent composer ever vied for the term, and those who engaged with it are already associated with other isms: Impressionism, Expressionism, Mysticism, Romanticism. Across the arts, historians have struggled to define symbolism. Was it fundamentally aesthetic or philosophical? Is it defined by style or by content? Opinions diverge, but they generally agree on three things: that symbolists were after the otherworldly, not merely to yearn for it, but to reach into it, that they bent classical technique to their will to achieve this, and that they did this in response to the positivism of their age. Research on musical symbolism is also slow in coming, but Russianists are ahead of the curve. An outstanding example is Simon Morrison's monograph, Russian Opera and the Symbolist Movement, which I have here. The book first appeared in 2002 as a development of his dissertation, and then he released it again in a second edition in 2018. Yeah, so I have the book here, so I'll just pass it around in case any of you might want to peruse it. Consistent with discussions of Russian literary symbolism, Morrison articulates differences between the Silver Age's two generations of symbolists. The first, decadent, akin to the French. The second, mystical, believing that art can alter reality itself, or theurgy. He also usefully identifies several features of Russian symbolist opera, and these support the present reading of Francesca, despite Morrison's dismissing Rachmaninoff from his discussion. First, Russian symbolist opera emphasizes the infiniteness of time and space, reflecting the symbolist's belief that music, quote, could be a portal, a trapdoor, or a gateway into another, higher form of perception, a time without time, and space without space. Second, to suggest this infiniteness, Russian symbolist opera uses symbols, whether as, quote, a device for suggestion and illusion, or even as a means for disclosure and revelation. Finally, to achieve these aims, a symbolist composer, quote, must depart from fixed musical systems, which assign a grammar and syntax to music. In some, Russian symbolist opera centers on liminal moments and oscillations, the familiar operatic binaries of the natural and the supernatural, the real and the dreamed, are effaced while time bends and folds over on itself. Rachmaninoff wasn't a mystical symbolist, but he was at times a decadent one. As we'll see, his Francesca checks all the boxes. Rachmaninoff began writing the opera in 1900 during a sojourn to Italy to a libretto by Modest Tchaikovsky that came in fits and starts. He finished the work only in 1905, premiering it the following year at the Bolshoi. The story, as you'll recall, is likewise Italian. It depicts Dante's meeting with Francesca and her adulterous lover, Paolo, in the second circle of hell. Their ill-fated love was conceived in intrigue and frustrated by Francesca's marriage to Lanciotto, whose jealousy led him first to place the lovers in a compromising situation and then to murder them, both at their first show of weakness. Rachmaninoff's symbolism lies not in the presence of such thematic material, which had long excited the Romantic imagination, but rather in his treatment of it. A comparison with its two most prominent Romantic precursors shows this, lists Dante's Symphony, 1857, and Tchaikovsky's Symphonic Fantasia, Francesca da Rimini, 1876. These works surely abound in chromatic bombast, but just as surely they proceed in a linear fashion suggestive of dramatic and temporal continuity. Rachmaninoff's Francesca draws the listener into the timeless vacuum of hell. It begins almost inaudibly, avoids chiseled gestures and clear formal junctures, and suppresses functional harmonic syntax. The syncopated descending two-note suspensions that open the opera at first suggest D minor, but slip imperceptibly into a G-sharp diminished seventh chord. Materializing like ghosts, oscillating 16th notes extend this harmony as they slither upward. An E appears in the bass, imparting a dominant character to the harmony, but no resolution ensues. Distorted with macabre dissonances, the music simmers, modulating not in harmony, but in voicing and register. The same harmony reappears following another textural accumulation, accompanied by the tam-tam, this time with an added C that should function either as a 13th or an enharmonic augmented 6th, but in fact functions as neither. This excerpt begins slightly before the slide. Already non-functional, the harmony soon becomes symmetrical as well, rolling forth in great waves of slowly undulating harmonic tension. A prolonged dominant pedal point on A emerges and then shifts suddenly, not to D minor as anticipated, but to F minor. This harmonic relationship has been defined in Neo-Riemannian theory as one of hexatonic poles, two modally mismatched triads that share no common pitches, but whose members each lie a half step apart, forming a hexatonic scale. Their symmetry makes them uniquely resistant, as one scholar has written, to interpretation in terms of diatonic tonality, obscuring the syntax necessary for illogical musical narrative. As a consequence, quote, they are frequently affiliated with an ethos of uncanniness. So it is here. The measures that follow this passage, which we'll hear in a moment, feature two more pairs of symmetrically related, modally mismatched chromatic medians. E major and G minor, related by octatonic scale, and F sharp major and D minor, another pair of hexatonic poles. And the surface of this score, as you'll see, is quite chromatic. So I'm talking about deeper harmonic structures. Rachmaninoff, thus, to borrow Morrison's language, departs from fixed musical systems, and he does so to animate an extremely slow structural harmonic rhythm, inducing a state of slow rolling terror rather than a dramatic sequence of events. So now we'll hear music from the last two slides. Rachmaninoff's music thus thwarts narrative cognition on a global level, or on a local level, but it does so on a global level too. The curtain rises as the orchestra builds to yet another dominant 13th chord, after which the chorus enters. We soon realize that we are hearing the same music that opened the prologue. This rotational approach induces a circular, non-linear perception of time, whereas repetition in music often serves to gratify or relieve a listener. Here it disconcerts, threatening to ensnare us in an inescapable vortex, rather like Francesca and Paolo themselves. As you may have surmised, I'm going to move on. Oh, sorry. Yeah, just in the interest of time, I'll move on. As you may have surmised, Rachmaninoff's Francesca also makes use of a potent symbol, the dominant 13th chord, voiced densely so as to obscure its functional tendencies, and punctuated by tam-tam or cymbal. Tantalizingly, this chord, when it appears without its minor ninth, is identical in intervallic content to the so-called Scriabin sixth that opens Scriabin's Third Symphony. Although here, unlike there, the chord does not retain its traditional function. So in this harmony, even though he's coming a couple of years after Scriabin's Third Symphony, he's actually using the same harmony in a non-functional way. That's actually more symbolistic, if we're going by style, than Scriabin was at that point. Rachmaninoff's voicing highlights the chord's identity as a subset of the whole tone scale, making his usage consistent with famous earlier uses of non-functional chromatic harmony, which of course we heard about this morning, which have been associated with the fantastical or the irrational. Crucially, the chord functions not as an imitative symbol, this is important for symbolism, but as a sonic encapsulation of hell, a place outside of time and space, which is confirmed by the chord's appearance beneath the opera's first sung text, Virgil's announcement that we now enter the blind abyss. Теперь вступаем мы в слепую бездну. In harmony with this symbolist aesthetic, the abyss chord, as I'm calling it, with its cyclical recurrences, thus serves as a symbol that undermines linear cognition. And it is in this respect that Rachmaninoff's Francesca differs most strikingly from Liszt and Tchaikovsky. Like them, he lays out Francesca's story in a broad tripartite design, depicting, respectively, Dante's descent into hell, Francesca's recounting of her love story, and her ultimate fate in hell. Here, however, hell encroaches on Francesca's telling of her story, collapsing temporal and spatial boundaries. Struggling to resist Paolo's advances, Francesca admonishes him that the torments of hell await us. Undeterred, he replies, I will be there with you, and she yields to his embrace. Precisely at this moment, the sinuous chromaticism from the prologue, agitatedly transformed, invades the musical fabric, buzzing threateningly around their impassioned declarations. So here is the moment when this transformed chromaticism reappears. So I'll be there with you. So watch out, in other words. And that chromaticism continues to intrude on their duet as they continue to express their affections. Here, in other words, to quote Morrison once again, time bends and folds over on itself, drawing a correspondence between the two temporal planes in which the opera takes place. Dante's present and Francesca's past enacted from a narrative present. The reminiscence foretells a doom that we have already witnessed, but which will yet be acted out. Past, present, and future thus unite. And so do Francesca and Paolo. As they kiss, the music of the prologue returns, rising and swirling around them with increasing terror. Following another pair of hexatonic poles, Lanciotto emerges from the shadows and with a single strike of the sword consigns them to eternal damnation as another abyss chord rings out. The chord thus becomes, to cite Morrison one last time, a portal, a trap door, a gateway into a time without time and space without space. See if I can get there. So they're not in hell yet, they're kissing, but hell's coming for them. Contrary to his public persona, then, Rachmaninoff proves himself an authentic symbolist. He does so, moreover, in a work with no literary connection to the movement. Rachmaninoff's Francesca da Rimini shows its symbolist stripes by inducing an alternative perception of reality, even by penetrating the boundary between the material world and the world beyond. No outlier in Rachmaninoff's oeuvre, Francesca's aesthetic kinship with its time provides yet another indication that his aesthetics are ripe for reevaluation, and that platitudes about his style, even when bolstered by his own commentary, ought to be abandoned in favor of objective inquiry. Thank you.
Right, we have about 6 minutes for questions. I cannot see the audience, so maybe you can.
Yeah, happy to take any questions. I don't know if we have any symbolist folks in here. Tanya?
I don't know that I'm a symbolist. I did do a project about Sophia Kienan.
Okay.
This is very like the kind of symbol of religious symbolism.
Uh-huh.
It's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I am really interested in the half steps.
Uh-huh.
Because this whole piece seems to be composed of half steps.
Right.
So it's this sort of interesting undulation of a little space
Yes.
that'll never settle down because it just keeps going and going and going.
Excellent.
So I wonder if you can speak more to this sort of uncertainty or maybe the kind of non-functional harmony that's creating this sort of bend in time where it won't settle in one place or
Oh, yeah. Right. No, it's an excellent question. It was about the liminal space implied by the pervasive use of half steps in the score. Tanya, I think you get it. I do. I think you got it. You know, I mean, it's ostensibly in the outer sections, in D minor, he ends there, but we're clearly not dealing with a functional elaboration of this harmony. There are hints. Now, the back flash, sure, that is in functional space. And that's where you can hear when those seconds encroach on that space, it feels invasive. It feels unsettling, you know, and that's where I think the collapse happens in the boundary. But in terms of the specific harmonies, you name it, you got it. We do have functional chromaticisms, you know, diminished seventh chords, for example. We have compound passing and neighboring tones. But then we've got the symmetrical variety. We've got hexatonic scales in there. We've got octatonic scales. We have many instances of just pure chromaticism. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's an all of the above with Rachmaninoff. Yeah, yeah, you bet. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, having looked at some symbolism in Scriabin, I see like a real noticeable difference. And I think like Schopenhauer, who to me in Scriabin would have been talking Rachmaninoff's ear off about the idea that you get to speak more and more to the spiritual,
right?
The more it becomes less representation. So
right.
Here we get the use of extended harmony, similar to my paper, to show evil,
right?
Evil magic,
right?
And it's just being expanded to really get at that. Whereas in Scriabin, you rarely have an associated text, and so the fact that there isn't an explicit meaning means that music's speaking to something that can't be captured.
Sure.
Which would be that higher form of symbolism. And thinking about that, the question I have for you is, I was wondering how much you've looked at how topic theory might speak here. I would be surprised if there weren't some really good examples of Umbra topic, which I was hearing.
Oh, yes.
And then it being contrasted at very significant moments in the storyline of Tempesta to show the underlying danger and the danger.
Excellent. That is such an excellent question. Thank you so much. And no, to answer your question, I have not conducted a topical analysis of this piece, but there is a clear and very teasing and tantalizing correspondence with Rubinstein's Diemen, his opera Diemen. In fact, that Paolo's statement, "I will be there with you," is practically a quotation from that story, from Lermontov's, it's Diemen, the title of the poem, yeah. Where he's trying to convince Tamara to kiss him, well, and more. It's the exact same situation. And I think that actually in the love duet, you can hear quite a lot of the legacy of the Russian romance as well. So yeah, in other words, I do think you're right. I think your suspicion is correct. This would submit to topical analysis well, but I'm afraid I can't speak to it in detail yet. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I would just also say I agree with your statement about the differences in the symbolism. I hope this came through. I'm not arguing that Rachmaninoff was a theurgic symbolist. I am arguing that he was a decadent symbolist. And that's just not the type that usually gets highlighted in our literature, including in Simon's book. He's on the theurgic bandwagon, and it's fascinating, right? But that doesn't mean this wasn't happening. I think where Scriabin is like Vyacheslav Ivanov's manifestation of symbolism, you can very much look at Rachmaninoff as being the musical representative of first-generation Russian symbolism. I'm talking Balmont, I'm talking Mirozhovsky, etc. And those are the ones whose texts he gravitated toward.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that was clear from your paper, and I think that distinction between those types of symbolism is very helpful.
Thank you. Probably all of our time. Oh, okay. I think I don't see any more questions.
You were just at time, so let's pause it here. Let's give a round of applause to Keenan, please.